I'm Charles Kaʻaiʻai. I work for the Western Pacific Regional Fishery Management Council. Are you guys all familiar with the Management Council? Huh? Yeah. You know what we do? Sure. Okay. We're one of 8 fishery management councils that was created by Congress in 1976 under the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. We have a Northeast Council, Mid-Atlantic Council, Caribbean Council, Gulf Council, the Pacific Council, the North Pacific Council, I know I'm missing one in there, and the Western Pacific Council, that's us. And in 1976, prior to that, Congress, you kind of managed all of the resources in the U.S. in Washington, right? And regulations came down. States controlled their waters, which was out to 3 miles for Hawaii. In other areas and other territories, that EEZ varies. But in Hawaii, 300 to 200 miles is managed by the Fishery Council. And that was a good idea, I think, of the Congress to do that, because I think fisheries management works better on a regional basis, because you have detailed, you have some details of management, details of the species, different species complexes. It's really hard to manage all of the fish with just one centralized, just one centralized location. So out here in the Western Pacific, we have probably the biggest EEZ to manage, because we manage the EEZ around Hawaii, and we manage the EEZ around American Samoa, and in the Marianas, Guam, and the Northern Marianas Islands, as well as the Pacific remote island areas, which is Holland, Baker, Johnston, and in Kio is Wake Island, those Pacific remote island areas. So we have to manage from there from 0 to 200. So the way we manage is we create regulations that govern fishing in those areas. And the main commercial fishery here in Hawaii is the longline industry. The nearshore fisheries are managed by the state. So we work in cooperation with the state to create regulations to regulate the fisheries in this area. And for traditional people, managing fish is really important. For Hawaii, prior to, I would say 1900, almost all of your protein, all of your nutrition came out of the ocean. You had a few sources on land, but there was a real strong dependence on ocean resources. So there's 3 distinct island regions in the Pacific, and we have parts of Micronesia, we have parts of Polynesia. We have to work with Melanesia. This is the way the Pacific is divided up. Hawaii, way up at the north, that's where we are. Micronesia, we manage the Mariana Islands. We have agreements managing with Kiribati, Marshall Islands. Melanesia, not too much, but we do have international agreements with those countries. So Hawaiian culture, and this is a picture of Sarawalese boats that came into Saipan. And Sarawal was where Maupiailu came from, right? So these are boats from his island. Maupiailu was responsible for the renaissance of Polynesian navigation. These boats are small. They sail over the ocean in these really small things. But we all come from this oceanic culture. And so our cultures traditionally are highly adapted to oceanic life. They're highly adapted to island life. All of them have this strong spiritual connection with the resources. I know some of the early texts that I read about missionaries coming to the island areas, they talk about islanders being so superstitious that they were, they had some fears of the night, and they had all of these superstitions. Well, that was their spirituality. They could manage their resources, but one hurricane would come along, boom, and you're hurting for a year. So they had this kind of spiritual relationship. They were careful not to disrupt the gods. They were careful not to disrupt nature. So they had this real strong connection to nature and a real almost intuitive grasp of the environment that was going on. They had a highly developed language, highly developed cosmology, and a lot of dependence on their genealogy. Genealogy plays a real important part in all of these island cultures, where you come from, who you're related to. They also have a kind of an extended genealogy, where you can be adopted into a genealogy, or you could adopt a genealogy. So there was this long kind of history, language, kind of poetry. I talked to Mao Kaʻaiʻai one time, and he told me there's hundreds and hundreds of songs for navigating the ocean. And some of the songs are thousands of years old, and they give you clues on how you navigate the ocean in these little tiny boats. And so I asked him, what? So are you just remembering those old songs, or are you adding to the old songs, or are you creating new songs? And he said, yes.
Yes, what?
They're doing all of that.
Oh, okay.
That it's an active culture that's going on continuously. And again, fish and marine life was the primary source of nutrition and protein. So in Hawaiian culture, which I'm going to talk about today, we think Hawaii was settled for 900 to 1300 years. Every time they have a new old archaeological dig, it kind of pushes it back. But in Hawaiian history, the first people that came here talk about people already being here. So when the first people came here, they said people were here already. And their culture may have been more ancient. Well, it was more ancient. And when you look for material, the more ancient the culture is, the less material they have left. Because most of the material culture that they created was from natural products, stones, wood, that would erode and rot away. So there wasn't much information about that, except that in our legends, we know that people were here when Hawaiians came. The people that came were adapted to this unique Hawaiian environment. They came from an oceanic culture. And Hawaiians, I think, they say, came from the Marquesan culture, from the Marquesas Islands. So they brought with them an oceanic culture and island culture already. In fact, we all share the same gods. Kane, Tangaroa, Kanaloa. We share those gods. Kanaloa was the god of the ocean. Kane was the god of the terrestrial. So probably the early settlements were family compounds. And I think some of the oldest family compounds that they found archaeologically is on the Big Island, in Kona, Ka'u district. And there's a lot of stories about different compounds. In Kona, there was a village that raised chiefs that taught people how to be leaders. On this island, there was a couple places, Kalapawai, and Kailua, and Salt Lake, out in Aliapakai. And as time goes on, the society becomes more stratified. So we're moving away from these small family compounds into a more stratified, more structured society. I guess about 600 years ago, a Tahitian chief comes from Tahiti, Pa'au, and he brings a structure. So the gods are at the top, and the chiefs are next, and the kahunas, and then all the way down to the maka'ai nana, to the common people. So he brings this structure into the society. So we have that structure. And then you can see that structure reflected in the ahupua'a. Anybody know what ahupua'a is? Okay. Ahupua'a was a section of land. Usually they describe it as a valley, but it could be land that had enough natural resources for the community to survive. And so you had ahupua'a, which is sort of like from the top of the mountain all the way down to the shoreline. And within each ahupua'a was enough material resources for the culture to survive. There are also smaller units of land, ili, and different smaller units of land that have special resources in them. There's one valley here on this island, Paoa Valley, that's an ili, but it's the whole valley. But it was part of the Nu'uanu ahupua'a. But it was an ili because it didn't have all of the materials you needed for the culture to survive. They had to go outside of that valley. So it was just a small section that belonged to another ahupua'a. There's also ilis on the Big Island that belong to families. There's also resource areas in the ocean that belong to families. I saw a map one time where it said, this uhu fishery here in the water on the reef belongs to one family. Then there's another fishery next to it, it belongs to another family. So Hawaiians had kind of organized the environment so they could live. And so you had all of these different ways, different families controlling different resources. In the 18th century, 1778, when Cook came, his cartographer estimated that there were 200,000 people here. Since then, they've done other kinds of modeling, and they think that the population was somewhere between 200,000 and a million. And the million number comes from some scientists modeled the food production areas on the islands and found that there was enough food production to maintain a steady population of 1 million. But by 1820, when the missionaries came, they found vast areas of Hawaii abandoned. They found villages abandoned, huts abandoned, ponds abandoned. And of course, they thought God had set this up for them. And what happened was we had a lot of disease come in with the first, with the whalers, with the first discoverers of Hawaii. And measles probably took out a lot of them. Also venereal diseases, other kinds of diseases that were brought in. And so when the missionaries came, they saw vast areas of Hawaii just abandoned. And by the 1880s, I think we were down to 50,000, 40,000 Native Hawaiians in all of Hawaii. That's a loss of 95% of the population in a century. Okay. But they had all of these traditions. They had divided up the land. Paʻaiʻai. Hawaii Paʻaiʻai is the entire archipelago of Hawaii. But it even goes beyond that because Kalakaua claimed all the way to Kure. So there's another 2,000 miles that goes beyond that to the northwest that belong to the Hawaiian Kingdom. Mokupuni. Mokupuni described the 4 large islands. And I know now we say 8 islands. There's 8 islands, right? But in the time of the kingdom, you had Hawaii, Maui Nui, Oahu, and Kauai. And Niihau was part of Kauai. So the Mokupuni were these 4 large island areas. Moku were divisions of the Mokupuni, of each island, that were large districts. And we sit here in Hanauma Bay, and throughout history, this area changed. It used to be in the Kona district, right? And then sometimes it was in the Kolapoko district. Different periods of time in history shows that this area kind of switched, and it probably depended on the resources that were here and the resources that were needed by each moku. And maybe it had to do with chiefly relationships and politics. Yeah. Maunalua Bay down on this side, that switched back and forth. Maunalua Bay to Hanauma Bay was part of that Kona district. In fact, currently it's part of the Kona district. The last mapping that was done here made this area part of the Kona district. Earlier mapping in history made this part of the Ho'olaupopo district this way. So we can see that mopus and boundaries changed throughout history. And it probably had a lot to do with the politics of the time, who was more powerful, whose political side was in ascendance, the resources that existed here, who needed the resources, how should the resources be divided up. Each mopu then was divided into these smaller pieces called ahupua'a. And these ahupua'a, as I said earlier, were areas that had all of the resources needed for the survival of the culture, Hawaiian culture. So you had lauhala, you had material for kapa, you had fresh water, you had food sources, you had fiber sources, all within this ahupua'a. Within the ahupua'a, you had sacred sites, you had cultural areas, you had sacred areas, you had areas that had specific resources that you couldn't find elsewhere, and these were protected. So when we talk about natural resource management, in Hawaii, we're talking about geographic communities, right? And we're talking about ahupua'a. And the traditional resource management was based on the traditional boundaries, so the ahupua'a boundaries. That's a picture of John Kaimikawa. I honor him because back in 2006, when we started down this path toward understanding ahupua'a, he came out and he guided us. He was part of this planning committee that we had for Fuvalu that we had in 2006. And he had very specific ideas on how ahupua'a functioned and how the purpose of ahupua'a was to make the land fruitful. And they used to call it aina momona, the fat land, the rich land. And he really guided us through the Puvalu series where we looked at the aha moku. And at that time, he called it the aha kiole. He had a Molokaʻi tradition. In Molokaʻi, they call this management system aha kiole. Everywhere else in Hawaii, they call it aha moku. So it's very bound to the geography. It's very site specific. So it was managed as a moku, as a whole district, but each of the ahupua'a contributed to the management of that district. You needed that size of district to be able to feed everyone in that district. Ahupua'a boundaries are recognized. As we went through this, we kind of did this project for about 2 years and tried to find ahupua'a in Hili. And darn it, those lines didn't change all the time. Everybody we talked to moved the line a little bit. So we kind of we work on a theory of ahupua'a, right? I mean, even if we're looking at geographic management, we have to work on a theory of ahupua'a because that line, oh, it used to be over here on this ridge. No, it used to be over on this ridge, right? So that line changed through people's memory, and I don't know whatever ways they imagined them to be. There's some stories where like 3 ahupua'a met at the top of a mountain, and that's where the chiefs sat in each ahupua'a and had a council. So we know, well, okay, they kind of ended up there, right? But as they travel along, going down, we don't know how they went. Access to resources was controlled. And within this stratified society, you had professionals. You had professional fishermen, you had professional lay makers, you had professional garment makers. This all controlled the access to those resources that these professionals needed to conduct their profession, conduct their practice. The fishermen were professional fishermen. They had their favorite hooks, they named their hooks, they kept their gear separate, they took care of their gear, they patched their nets. It was a profession. They worked with the canoe people, canoe professionals, who could go up into the forest and pick a tree, raise that tree for I don't know how many generations, cut the tree down, age it, shape it in the forest, drag it back to the canoe haole, and make a canoe. I don't know how long it took them to do it. I mean, now with chainsaws, you can kind of whack one out pretty quickly. Yeah. But in the old days, the way they cut the tree in the old days too was kind of interesting. They had an adze, so the blade was like this, right? So you cut the top, and you cut the bottom, and you knock that piece out. You cut the top, and you cut the bottom, and you knock that piece out. That is labor intensive. I don't know who wants to do it that way. You know, fire up the old chainsaw, and it comes down. The resources and those ecological niches were very well understood. All these professionals knew. The feather gatherers knew where the birds with the feathers they wanted landed in the trees, so they could put gum on the branches, catch them, take the feathers off, clean them off, and let them go. So you grow another feather. So it was very, very detailed knowledge, very broad knowledge of the environment. 2007, the legislature passed a law, and the law created the Ahamoku Advisory Committee, Advisory Council, the Ahakiole Advisory Committee, advisory to the legislature. And these folks, Charlie Kapua, Les Kularoyo, Ile Benyamina, she's passed on, Raymond Naki. These people went out into the community and they tried to gather up information about what that traditional natural resource management system was. And when we all came together and we sat down and went over the stories, wrote them down, what we came out was there are 5 things in traditional management. And funny, they kind of go through resource management all throughout history. That the regulatory system was adaptive management. So it was a management that adapted to the needs of the community, management that adapted to what was happening in the environment, what was happening in the ecosystem, that was responsive to what was happening to the resources. There was a code of conduct, which was a non-regulatory process that supported your regulatory process. So you had a code of conduct, and kind of it was like, oh, we don't do that here. You know, we do something else. That's not the way you do it. That kind of code of conduct is like tied into the culture. Tied into the culture, so they know what's right and what's wrong. But they have a code of conduct to guide your action in the natural environment. Community consultation. You had ahupua'a councils in the old days. You also had mofu councils in the old days. And what occurs is that the konahiki, the resource manager, met with his community to determine the community needs. The konahiki knew what the resources were in the environment through direct observation. So he was in the water. He was on the mountain. So it was direct observation and management. Direct observation, which feeds into the adaptive management piece. There was education. People talking to each other, telling each other. And it wasn't just education in one way. Education came both ways. And eligibility criteria. This was a tough one. This one, the committee struggled with this one. What they were saying is that to participate in the traditional resource management system, you have to have knowledge. And part of that knowledge comes with blood. Right? But even here for the konahiki for Honolulu Bay, when I was a kid, I was a Portuguese guy. You know, so he didn't have the blood, but he was a konahiki for this area. There was another guy in this area, I think his name was Hoppy Reyes or something. That was another Portuguese guy, right? So it wasn't based on blood. It was based on knowledge. The person who has the most knowledge of the resources in that area. They still struggle with it. The Ahamoku Council still struggle with that. Okay, this is the adaptive management process. It's sort of like an experiment, you know? You make a plan. We want more moai next year. Okay, so the way we're going to do it is we're not going to harvest the spawning this year, and we're going to watch and wait for the spawning next year, and we're going to harvest the spawning next year. Because we leave it alone this year, we should have more and more next year, okay? So we implement the plan. If it works, great. You check your progress. If it doesn't work, you correct it. And you continue. So it's like an experiment that goes on, right? You make a hypothesis, you implement the hypothesis, you check if it's working. If it's not working, you correct it. If it's working, you just keep going. So that's the adaptive management process. You're going to have to educate the community to what's going on, and the way that they used to do it in the old days was they'll just put a couple, right? Just put a couple, hang the thing on there, and everybody went through the community. Okay, we kind of take this now, right? And but then you check your progress. You're in the water, checking the code of conduct. So it supports the adaptive management determined by the community based on natural resource management priority, the community needs, community priority, and community expectations. So this is a picture of Puimalama o Mo'omomi's code of conduct. And you know, it's in that steak brown and white colors, but they have this at their area. And they have all of these rules. One of the rules that they have is that if you're a young man or a young woman, don't fish in the near areas, go farther, because they're going to save the fishing in the near areas for the kupuna and the children. So they make these, and the codes of conduct can be changed through the community working together. Community consultation. This is a group of people. This was on Maui at Moku'ula, and she was working on management of the Moku'ula area, and these were people that were invited from all over the state to come in and to take a look at that area and consult, so that you can consult what's important to this community. And this is really a community of interest, right? When we talk about community-based management, we're talking about geographic communities. So this is really a community of interest, and they are discussing what to do at Moku'ula on Maui. Education. It's Uncle Mac, Poi, with some high school students. He's telling them about Mo'omomi and the resources that exist there. He's kind of funny, makes them eat all kinds of things. It's fun to watch. But Mac is very, very well versed with the resources at Mo'omomi. And he adopted that mantle as Konohiki because he thought that that area was becoming run down and not being taken care of. Eligibility criteria. You have to have knowledge. And one of the things that the legislature asked was, well, how do you know the guy has knowledge, right? Well, then you ask the community, right? Who's the Akule guy in your community? Well, in my community, it's the Kalamas. Yeah, so if we need something, if we need information to manage the Akule, we go to the Kalamas. That is how it's done. This is on Kauai. I forget his name now. He makes nets. He sits there and makes nets. He still throws net. He's in his 80s and he still throws net. I have one of his nets in my car. Okay. So, in traditional Hawaiian resource management system, communities still adhere to the traditional Hawaiian districting. Okay, so we know Hanauma Bay is either Kona or Kolaupo. Okay. Right now it's Kona, right? Somebody decided in the state that this belonged in the Kona district. What we call East Oahu. Right? The traditional management of resources was under the administration of a Konahiki. Konahiki is kind of an interesting concept. You know, Kamehameha III took away the power of the Konahiki to manage the resources because he thought that the Konahiki were abusing the communities. And then he put the thing back in place. So obviously there were some changes of personnel that went on at that time. And that Konahiki had a direct observation of all the resources there. Oh, I forget his name, Kaʻaiʻai. He would drive around in his truck, and he would talk to the farmers, he would talk to the fishermen, he would talk to the community people, he would talk to the church, and find out what's going on. And he was in the water, and he was catching fish to find out what the state of that fishery was. And that's how he managed. And I think one of the things when we talked about early on about the Magnuson Act, I mean, people in Washington trying to manage here, that's like an impossible thing, right? But having a guy that's actually in the community, that's actually in the environment, managing, that's something else. So at that finer scale, the resources were managed for the benefit of the tenants of Ahupua'a. And tenants, that's kind of a loaded legal word right now. Because if you are a tenant, you have all of these rights that are accrued to you through the Ahupua'a regulations and traditions and laws that recognize tenancy. If you were a tenant of an Ahupua'a, you had a share of that fishery. Those Konahikis in the early 20th century, when after the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, they sent a guy named John Cobb here to inventory the fisheries for Congress. And he inventoried the fisheries and reported back to Congress. And Congress said, well, if you want to maintain your right to the fisheries, then you need to apply to the courts for that right. And what happened in the court was if you applied for the right to that fishery because you were a tenant, they extinguished your right in the courts. So then people sat back and said, wait, I'm not going to go to court, but I still have those rights. And that, I think, becomes a kind of a legal difficulty, because if you're a tenant, if your rights haven't been extinguished, then you probably still have them. But if you go to the American court system, they will extinguish your rights. So that becomes kind of a catch-22. So tenants still have rights to fisheries. And there's a lot of knowledge of the species that are managed in the environment. One example is on Mo'omomi, and I think I have a Mo'omomi chart in here. Uncle Mac decided that they would manage moi. And what he wanted to do, because moi, you have a couple moi, the season for moi begins in May, I believe, right? And it runs through the end of the year, because that's when moi spawn. So Mac went out and he began to catch moi. And he began to open up the moi and look at how ready they were for spawning. And over a number of years, he determined, well, here's what the moi do. They spawn at this time a couple of days before the full moon. And for a while he thought it was the wahine, the female moi, and moias changes sex, right? When they're small, moi is male. When they get big, they turn to female. And so he was checking the females and the males, and he discovered something. He said, you know what? The females are ready to spawn after the males are ready to spawn. When the male is ready to spawn, that keeps the females. So he was able to put down when the moi spawned. And when he did that, what happens is moi are broadcast spawners. So they come into where the sand is all being washed up by the ocean, and they broadcast their eggs, the males come in, fertilize the eggs, and they all disappear. He got it down to where he said they're going to spawn, and after this full moon night, before they disperse, take them all. And so he was able to manage at that finer scale. And this is his spawning calendar. The red months are the months that they actually spawn in Mo'omomi. The orange months are the months that they've been observed spawning. In other words, it could extend, and he doesn't know why it could extend, but it could extend, and maybe an environmental factor why it extends, right? But Uhu is solid. Ulua is solid. So when we have the summer run of Ulua and all those fishermen go out there with their big pools catching the Ulua, what they're doing is catching the spawning aggregation. Because summertime Ulua fishing, that's the big deal, right? They catch 100-pound Ulua from shore, but they're catching the spawning aggregation. And there doesn't seem to be, through a tagging project, there doesn't seem to be any reduction in the population. In 2012, the legislature created the Ahumoku Advisory Committee, nominated by the governor from a list of nominations from Ahumoku Council of each island. Their job is to advise the chair of the LNR. So the Ahumoku Advisory Committee, gone. They're replaced by the Ahumoku Advisory Committee. One of the weaknesses is that Ahumoku Council is still organizing, right? We got that thing, the eligibility criteria, difficulty of keeping people on the committee, personalities. So they're still organizing. This is kind of functioning, but it's not functioning fully to what we would like. You know, I think they could have a great impact on the way the LNR manages, how the state manages the resources. Okay, so this is the things that they have to do, and people are doing it for free, right? They have to come in, they have to meet, they have to organize, they have to sit down and go through that, prioritizing their goals and objectives. They have to do outreach, they have to get out to the people, they have to consult with other people. They need community support. So all of this is going on, keeping them from fully organizing. But I think over time we'll be able to get it. I was asked to talk a little bit about the Hāina CBSFA. I wasn't able to, I didn't participate in the Hāina CBSFA process. And when I finally read it, and I had asked them for a long time for a copy of their draft plan, one of the things that struck me was they put subsistence fishing in and almost equated it with traditional practice. And I don't want to see subsistence fishing to be equated with traditional practice. Subsistence fishing is another issue, completely traditional practice. We have quite a lot of knowledge of traditional practice, and we don't really understand some of the things that traditional people do. Traditional people eat the pua. You know, we have size limits. Well, you can eat the pua, which is the juvenile, the firstborn of fish. And they used to eat that. In the Marianas, they eat rabbit fish. I mean, tiny little things. You know, that's their tradition. In the Marianas, what we were able to prove was that, you know, them taking this aggregation of fish, because most of them die anyway, it didn't impact the population that was there. We got an exemption for the traditional people to harvest that resource. We can do it that way. I think there was a question on the public outreach and public review about Hāina CBSFA. I know that there were meetings going on over 10 years. I seem to always miss the meeting. You know, right now the legislature is telling them, you need to go out and do the public plan. That's what the legislature is telling them. They try to use HRS 188.22.6, the designation of community-based subsistence fishing areas. That law was, that regulation was put in place in about 1992 or 1993. And part of it was to help Uncle Matt from Mo'omomi, who we saw doing the education with the high school kids, to get his Mo'omomi plan in. There's been only one community that's been recognized under 188.22.6, and that's the West Hawaii Fishery Council. What Hyanna did was they created a new 188-22.9, and that creates regulations for the Hyanna community-based subsistence fishing area. So the regulations they created was like bag limits. You could only take 2 he'e a day. You could only, so a certain area that was off limits for everyone, only kupuna could go there. And they had that and want to put it into Hawaii revised statutes under Chapter 91. So you got 22.6. I thought this sunsetted, but apparently it did not sunset. Or maybe my memory's fading. Anyway, so they add 22.9. This is a picture of some of the work we did on Nihau, with Nihau folks, right? All of these names, and this is just the tip of the end of Nihau, all of those names refer to a cultural resource or an actual natural resource of this area. I think that if we were to create 188.22.10, 188.22.11 for each of these communities, we would just have a mess because I think every island is like this, right? I mean, and you would have to talk to the Nihau people that would tell you what the cultural resource or the cultural value is for each of these names, but they were able to go around the island and put all of these names in on the map for the resources that exist in that area. And every island is like that. So I think if we go down Hyanna's path, that may not be, I mean, Chapter 188 is going to get huge. Right? That's going to get huge with rules for everything. Our council, the CDFMP, we do a little different thing. So this is the process. The community has requests for assistance. We have we research to make sure that the community is a real community, that they have rules of organization, they have regular meetings, so that they're a real geographic community that we can work with. We have an initial meeting with the community to determine if there's a desire and need for developing a marine management plan. Some places don't need them. They run fine, you know. And we work out a schedule for meetings, and we work with them for some benchmarks and for completion. The initial meeting looks like this. This can be a long meeting, can be a short meeting. Usually turns into a long meeting because people begin to air their grievances. Yeah? And that's what the process becomes in a lot of ways. It becomes a place for people to air their grievances. This is our process. This is actually when we're into it, once they agree, and we start the workshops. We have to work in defining the management area, defining the study area, identify the target resources, map the areas. We have a GIS person comes out with us. We lay out big maps. We got to work with the community so they understand what we're doing. It's not an easy thing. Yeah. So we define the objectives. Then we do research on their objectives, predicting future uses. We work with them on that. Stage 3 is we begin to develop the plan, and the plan comes out of all their objectives and goals for the community. And that defining and prioritizing those objectives and goals is the heavy lift. Because it's every person in that room has a different idea of what's important. Some want to preserve an area for tourists, and other people say, "Damn the tourists! We want to be able to fish this area." So there's all of this going on, and that needs to be worked out within the community. All we can do is take it down and make sure. And at the end, there we come back and say, "Is this what you guys really want? Are you sure?" And then we go back and we look at ways that we can work with the government to achieve their goals and objectives. So this is the pre-planning. Phase 2, we have 2 workshops. We identify the players and the stakeholders. We identify management area, study area. We identify resources in the plan area. We map use areas in the management area and develop objectives for the management plan. First section, these things that we cover in those sections, and they are 10-hour workshops. They're 8 to 10 hour workshops. Phase 3, we draft the plan. We take it back to them to review for completeness. We do a wide review. In Guam, we had a thing that we worked with the government. Guam have municipal areas. They have 19 different villages in Guam. And each village has a mayor. They have a mayor's council. So we made the proposal to the mayor's council that we have this available, this kind of planning available, if you would agree to it. The mayor's council assigned 2 villages to it. We're now working with 3 villages in Guam to get that done. So we work with the government to do that. We're in this phase for those plans right now. Community approval of the plan, presentation and acceptance of the plan. Once we do that, we publish the plan. I have a copy of one of the plans that we did here, just to show you. That's the Moleso community-based plan we put together for them. And this is what the workshop agendas look like. It's all timed out. We have handouts. We go with a big pile of paper for them to work through, posters for them to work on, maps, and we go through this agenda. And then, so what's in the plan? We have community objectives for managing local resources. We have a conservation objective, a socioeconomic objective, and a governance objective. Some guys come up with different objectives that they want to add on. That's fine. Some come up, we only need 2 of them, conservation and governance, and that's fine too. So this is what we put in the plan. Okay, so it creates a framework and a process for the community to organize and manage their local resources, engage with agencies and authorities who have responsibility for managing resources, create advisory bodies to make recommendations for management of local resources. So that comes out of the plan. It's all work, right? It's all communities working. What the plan does, it identifies the agencies and authorities that have jurisdiction over resources in the community that the community wants to conserve. One of the things that happened in Guam is that the community had to pass a resolution through the Guam legislature to give the authority to zone to an agency that lacked it legislatively. And so now they can work with the agency to do their zoning. Make recommendations for education and outreach projects, makes recommendations for the collaborative monitoring of resources in the management area. And finally, it gives the community a framework and a process to participate in and influence the management of their coastal and marine resources. It provides tools to effect changes in the current management regime that will increase enjoyment and benefit from these resources. Thank you. Any questions?
Do you teach this?
Do I teach this?
I mean, if somebody wanted to learn about this stuff, is there classes on this? Like, Hawaiian and all that?
Yeah, not really. I mean, the way we developed this was there was a need in the community, and we had gone through a 5-day workshop with some community, some coastal marine spatial planning people, and we looked at the workshop and thought, hey, we can use some of this in our communities. So we took all of their material and we started to massage it to something we can use in the communities. And no, we don't really have a class. We go out and facilitate communities to manage their resources. Maybe we should, but
it's like the singing the songs in Mao. If you don't do it, it's not gonna.
Yeah.
We're all getting to the white stage.
I know.
Interesting.
Do you think the process is too cumbersome?
The what?
Too cumbersome. It's too encumbered. There's too much input. Everybody wants a little bit of the time.
No, I think it's necessary. It's hard. It's not easy, but I think that it's necessary. I think you have to go through that process. I think you have to make concrete within you what you value, right? And then be able to deal with the community. I mean, you live with these people, right? You live in the same geographic area. Do you have the same values? And you have to communicate with each other to find that common ground. And I think you can ignore it your entire life, and does the environment benefit? Does the community benefit? I don't know. But I think if you deal with your neighbors and you come out with these values that you both can see eye to eye on, and then work to implement those values, I think that environment can be better. I think that community can be better. But it's not easy.
Was this the way they run things before white man came?
I think it is. I mean, I didn't live back then. I think it is, but looking at the historical references, I think there was a real seriousness about it. It was a very, very much a serious thing, you know? If the fish didn't come in one year, the village starved.
That's right.
If a hurricane wiped out your taro, the village starved. And I think that's what makes you kind of look superstitious, right? Geez, you know, I'm not going to make any waves. I'm not going to have this natural thing come in and destroy everything I have.
Well, this would happen in those days. Would other communities help that devastated community?
I would hope that they would, but I don't know for sure. Remember, you had Moku districts, which were districts that were governed by different chiefs and governed under different systems. It might have been like kingdoms, you know. I don't know what the relationships were. I do know in the Pacific that there's a long history of civil wars between neighboring districts that probably existed here. I don't know. But I don't know. That's a very good question. I would hope that they would. My liberal left-wing side would hope that they would. You know?
The picture you showed of Ni'au with had all the different names. What were they named after?
Some of them were named after, they were in the names, and the people who gave us the names could tell you what they were. In the name would be, this is the Nenui spawning area. This is where the sharks cupped. This is where fresh water came out of the rocks. This is where there was a cultural site because in history somebody landed there. So all along the coast, it was like almost every 50 yards or so, there's another important site. And if we go down that method of creating regulations for each community, it would be impossible for, part of what you want the community plan for is to have the state help you enforce your plans, right? But if you got so many different rules for so many different communities, the state's hands are going to be tied. They're not going to be able to enforce it. And I think we're seeing that with the American Samoa village-based plan. They have their whole village base still intact, their cultural system. When they signed the agreement with the U.S., they ceded all the lands of Eastern Samoa to the United States, but held to themselves Fa'a Samoa. Fa'a Samoa is the Samoan way. The Samoan way involves the land. So even if they say they ceded all the lands to the U.S., they held on to the lands. So their village system still exists. They tried to implement village-based rules into the American Samoa government. They had a difficult time enforcing it. And they're still having a difficult time enforcing it. So they have to have some kind of paradigm, in the way that we kind of address it in our plan is, it's got to be legal under the government system that exists. You cannot, one of the things, you cannot say only Hawaiian people can use this, right? You can't say that. That's illegal under this system. Any U.S. citizen can use any resource anywhere in the United States, subject to the rules and regulations. So you have all of these kind of conflicting things, and the whole idea is to try and get it so it works.